You got Cyclops all like Nightcrawler's like bam, and then bam, and better. Hey everyone, welcome back to Not a Strong Start, the podcast with filmmakers to talk about film, television, and reminisce on those cartoons that raised us while our parents were at work. Today is a special episode, not because you're just stuck with just me, but because we're talking about X-Men 97. It's finally all finished up. We've been wanting to talk about this since it freaking came out, but time gets away from you. So here we go. Let's dive into this. It's been a big thing. Everyone's been watching it. If you haven't been, definitely check it out. I mean, even if you weren't an X-Men fan or if you just never got to catch up with it when you were younger, now's a great time. I mean, they have all the old episodes on Disney Plus, so you can catch up to it and then hop right into this one. But does this live up to the hype? Does this carry on the torch as we wanted it to? There was a lot of hype getting into this show, a lot of social media talk about Rogue's butt, which I gotta say, let's just squash this right now, all right? Yes, there was that episode back in the day where Rogue's butt was just bulbous and in your face and Apocalypse was thirsting over it. But every episode wasn't like that. Most of the time, they kind of drew her simple. Like, granted, yes, she was sexy. All the X-Men women were sexy. And it does seem like to some extent that they may have toned some of that down in X-Men 97. But let me tell you right now, there are clips, which I'll point to right here and here and there and there, where you can see a comparison. It's like the moments where she wasn't and was hot in the old one, and the same goes on here. All right, they all have their moments. I mean, Madeline Pryor pops up in this, and we'll get into who she is soon enough, and she proves that they're not afraid to go sexy in this show. But in any case, that's not even the talking point that people should have been focusing on. It should have been the stories. Are the stories going to hold up to like how the old ones were? The old ones, honestly, the old X-Men, they're like soap operas for kids. They were great. If you read the X-Men comic books as a kid like I did, they're very important to your formative years of who you became as an adult and human being. I felt that the X-Men comic books personally were great for the allegory of life and what we go through for being different, not just in the sense of like, oh, racism and all that kind of stuff, just being different, being an outsider. It's kind of like the Spider-Man thing. It's like anyone can be Spider-Man. The X-Men represented that. Anyone can be the X-Men in that sense, where it's just like, what it's like to be that odd man out. Whether you're the kid who's in drama and everyone's making fun of you, or the kid who likes, playing cards, like Magic the Gathering, or reading your comic books. Like, this was for those people, for those outcasts. Nowadays, people who are LGBTQ and just another race or whatever, like it all relates to all that kind of stuff. So the X-Men were that great go-to for people looking for someone to relate to. Now, I feel that the X-Men 97 show does a good job of portraying those stories again. Especially look at episode 1. Episode 1 is pretty much just episode 1 of the original X-Men cartoon. They almost do a 1-for-1 recap, but instead of following Jubilee, we got Sunspot, which is Roberto da Costa. I felt it was a fun episode. It does a really good job of just getting you into what this world's going to be like, what's it going to feel like. A lot of talk of the animation saying it doesn't hold up. Personally, I feel the animation does a really good job. Does it have the same detail as the original X-Men cartoon? Of course not. But the original X-Men cartoon was also hand drawn, but they're trying to match like the styles of the comic book artists at that time, like Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri and such. And that's a lot to ask for, honestly. The amount of line work that these guys did, which you can see here in the images that I'm popping up, it's a lot. And the original X-Men cartoon did a good job of trying to attempt to capture that. I think in this day and age with digital cartoons and stuff like that, and the 2D animation using 3D as a background or backdrop, there's a lot more we can do now to make life a little easier on animators. And personally, I think they did a good job. I think the action scenes are phenomenal. It's smooth, it's clean. I gotta say, for anyone out there, I'm talking to you, Jose, on this one.
You talking to me?
If you hated Cyclops before, you might still hate him. All right. He's still got the same attitude, but his leadership and his skills are par none. Like no other X-Men cartoon or movie has honestly captured how awesome and badass Cyclops can be like this cartoon did. And episode 1, it's almost like it wants to squash the haters, kind of like what they did with Aquaman and having Jason Momoa play Aquaman. It's like, look, Aquaman's cool. They did that for Cyclops in this first episode, I feel. There's an opening scene where they're going to save Sunspot, and Cyclops is just using his power blasts to like push himself away and dodge moves and get forward and stuff. And there's even a moment where he has like a little funny thing which calls back to the first episode, which was a very 90s catchphrase. So the guy catches him, takes his visors off, and he's like, "Oh no, please don't." He's like, "Please, I'll do anything." And he's like, "Nah." And then he just does a super blast and this destroys everything. And he kind of had the same thing in the first episode of the original X-Men cartoon, where like he's fighting a Sentinel and he's like pretending to surrender, and he's like, "Not." And that's such a 90s thing. We were always like, "Gotcha, not." So that was really cool. I think that was a nice little throwback right there. But besides that, like having Bishop and Storm and all them, super kick-ass. They crushed it. The biggest thing to me was that ending scene when like they're going after Master Mold again, and they're just jumping from the plane, or the plane has, well, the Blackwing has been destroyed for like the umpteenth time because it's always going to be destroyed, and they're falling down, and like ones with superpowers that can fly, like Rogue and Archangel and such, in Storm, they're just flying around. Cyclops, no parachute, nothing. He's just free falling, going down, and then he uses his optic blast to slow down his fall and have a superhero landing, and then summons the X-Men behind him. If you don't think that's badass and have at least an ounce of respect for Cyclops in that moment, then I guess nothing's gonna win you over. Because I don't know. To me, that was like the dopest shit. I'm not even a Cyclops fan. He's never been my favorite either, but I never hated him like others do. In this moment, I was like, I think he kind of like climbed some ranks up in there. Like he may have jumped up a bit, and I definitely wanted to see more of him. But that being said, one of the things that I know I struggled with this series, I will say, and I'm going to be praising a lot of it, but there is one thing that I felt that held this series back, and that was its speed. The great thing about the old series is that it really took its time. It paced itself out with everything. So comparison, think back to the Phoenix Saga. The Phoenix Saga in the comic books, it took like what, 18, 19 issues to tell that whole story. And this is going back from like the Phoenix first is introduced, early 80s, late 70s or whatever, going all the way into like the issues of like the 130s, 140s or whatever, when it goes into the Dark Phoenix Saga, and we get to see the Hellfire Club and all that. So it took a few years to tell this story in the comic books, and then in the animated series, they do it about like 9 episodes or so. And this is broken up between like 4 episodes or so to tell the Phoenix Saga when she first gets to Phoenix, and another like 4 or 5 episodes when it's the Dark Phoenix. It's pretty truncated when you compare to the comic books. Like I said, a few years, almost 20 comic books. That's a lot to bring down to like 9 episodes. But at least you got 9 episodes sort of to really breathe. In this series, they're taking like 5 to 6 storylines and then bringing them down into 1 episode, And it seems like an exaggeration, but I think that the best example is like you look at the Inferno storyline. The Inferno storyline, which happened in the 80s, this was like about 12 issues long within the X-Men comic book. So you got like Uncanny X-Men, the X Factor, New Mutants, all that kind of stuff. And it kind of bled into the regular comic books too, of like Avengers, all that kind of stuff. They took that and they brought it down to 1 episode. And you could argue they kind of let it develop within like the episodes 1 and 2. But the reality is like it really unfolded in episode 3. And so it's like, how are you going to tell such a grandiose story in only 30 minutes? And it really also took away the importance of Madeline Pryor. So like Madeline Pryor in the comic books, she's a clone, just like she is in the cartoon. But in the comic books, Jean Grey dies after the whole Phoenix saga. She sacrifices herself. And now Scott is left lost. Like he lost the woman that he loves. This is the person that he grew up with as a teenager into a man, learning how to control his powers and become a leader. She was there with him side by side through all of that. And now she's gone. He doesn't know where he exists, where he lies within this world of the X-Men. So he leaves the X-Men and he's just gone for a bit. And eventually he meets a woman who is Madeline Pryor, and they form a relationship. There's obviously the connection of like, wow, she looks like my ex-girl and stuff like that. But that's not too leaned into all that much. It isn't. But like there's a whole storyline of just them becoming a couple. And that's for like a couple years or so before all of a sudden we find out, oh, she's not human. She has powers just like Jean does. Oh, okay. And all of a sudden we get to find out that they're gonna get married. They get married and then they have a kid. Who's that kid? Soon to be Cable into the future. But for right now, he's just Nathan. And that whole thing goes down. And once that starts to unfold, a few, storylines later, then we get Sinister and we find out that she's actually a clone and all this stuff. And it becomes this big deal because Sinister and her are this huge threat that just destroys like the X-Men's world and everything around it. Now in this, they play it off like she's been Jean Grey the whole time, which I don't think is a bad twist. I think that's actually adds a great layer to it where it's like, when was the switch? We'll never truly know when the switch was. I think that's really great for them to have to tackle and handle. But that would have been better within episodes as opposed to just the one episode. I feel like there's just too much rushing of things. And granted, when you're giving yourself only 10 episodes to tell these stories, that's not a lot of breathing room. You got to think like back in the day, they had almost like 20 episodes where they can tell these stories. And that was the beauty of these things back then, because they're really trying to follow the best era of X-Men, which is the Claremont era. Claremont brought back life to this series where it was dying. This is a series that had got taken not off the shelves per se, but they weren't putting any creative talent behind it within the 70s. Like they were just reprinting issues that happened from the 60s. And then Chris Claremont comes in and just revitalizes the whole thing. You're getting storylines like the Phoenix Saga, Inferno, Fall of the Mutants, and so much more. Like it's just endless. Like this guy was writing for this series for over a decade. This guy is X-Men gold. The best stories you're ever going to think of is from him. And that's why the cartoon was kept on borrowing from it. But with that, like if you start soaking up all those stories now into this 10 episodes, you don't got much left. Like at this point, we're leaving his era and we're coming to an era that's not bad. Like the 90s weren't all bad, and neither were the 2000s. But at the same time, they're not super celebrated like back in the day. In which going forward, they do start to dabble into new writers, which were really good, like Grant Morrison and such. Which honestly brings me to another important thing that I really love about what they've been doing with this series. It's loaded with Easter eggs, honestly, with things in the background that you see from like the picture of the original X-Men on the mantle to even like little stupid things where like they reference like having gold ball powers, which are how ridiculous that'd be. And that there's a character later on in like the 2015, 2016, whatever, called Gold Ball, and that was his power. He just made gold balls. It's such a stupid power. I don't think they've done much with him since. But it's like little stupid things like that for the comic book reader. That's really nice. Like it's refreshing. And granted, a lot of people saw this like X-Men 97. It's just nostalgia bait, and it is. There's a lot of nostalgia bait in this series, but a lot of times it's handled so well, you don't even mind it, honestly. Except for the people who don't know X-Men, you're never gonna notice it. It's just gonna be like a nice, cool little thing. For the people who read the comic books, though, it's it's like here's your dessert. This is for you. We're paying attention to you guys. Like one of the things I really liked was the constant references to actual comic book pages or panels, especially covers. Like for instance, you can see the wedding photo of Jean and Cyclops, or Madeline in this case, which references straight to issue of X-Men 30 from the 90s. It's almost a one for one, except for like, the titling and everything like that. But I love seeing stuff like that. You even go forward when Magneto is captured and they have him hanging up, almost crucified, but on the X just harkens right back to issue 251, where Wolverine is on the cover in the X standing. Going back, kind of like I said, in the old cartoons, a lot of things got to breathe. You got to have a lot of episodes that really let things go and expand. Then you also had your one-off episodes, which were really good, where you just focus on like that one character. Like you'd follow Wolverine to Japan, where he'd have like a battle with Silver Samurai, who you do see in this new series, even if it is just a cameo thing in the end. It's nice seeing other X-Men characters just pop up. But like you'd have like solo character moments. And those were great filler episodes. And filler episodes are always kind of like argued against, at least when it comes to live action. When you're watching a show like Supernatural and there's 20, 30 plus episodes, you don't really want a filler episode sometimes, because it's like, well, we were just in the middle of a big battle with Lucifer. What's going on with that? I don't want to see a little side thing or whatever. And it definitely becomes an issue when you're dealing with 8 episode runs, which happens a lot with these streaming services, where if you have 6 to 8 episodes, then you really don't want a filler, because it's like just go straight to the point, because we ain't got time to be stepping away from the big story. We want to hit it constantly. Now I feel with cartoons, you can have some leeway with that. Especially you guys consider cartoons are generally catered towards a younger crowd. Like when we watch these cartoons, we were pre-teens, single digits, going from elementary school and everything home and wanting to watch our cartoons. Saturday mornings were dedicated to this cartoon. for a child. So I kind of feel like they're catering to the adult who watch this cartoon, because there's a lot of mature content. Even back then there was. This is a very adult cartoon, but it was portrayed in a way that was good for kids to understand and not feel like they're being talked down to, which I thought was really nice. You know, it assumes that the person is intelligent enough to understand the concepts that are being portrayed to them. And that was a beautiful thing about the original. And I think this one definitely takes that and elevates it a bit. But that being said, we only really have maybe one or two filler episodes within a 10 episode run here, being the first episode, which sets everything up. But I feel like it's important, if that's not going to be setting up anything grander, if it's going to be its own little thing. And arguably it is actually a part of everything else in some way, showing the beginnings of this human militia against the mutants and the sentinels and everything that's going on there. Like, that was a big part of it. So even then, I can't consider it too filler, but it's like, it's so standalone, you could watch it on its own and not feel like you needed to watch more. But then you have the Jubilee episode, which is episode 4, having the whole thing with Mojo and everything. It doesn't really need to be there. It doesn't elevate anything going forward. The only thing I'd say it does arguably is we get to focus on Jubilee, which I think is really nice, because with what's coming later on in this season, with the whole Operation Zero Tolerance, or the whole tolerance is extinction, as they put it here, I thought it was really nice how they focused on her and tried to elevate her in a way where, like, she can grow. Because the sad thing about her character, ever since the 80s into the 90s and so on, she's kind of like a joke of the X-Men, you know. There's every so often, like almost every 10 years or so, they kind of introduce like this new younger character that's supposed to be how we see the world of the X-Men. Like, they're our avatar. We see it through them, like Shadowcat and everything, and then came Jubilee. But the thing with Shadowcat's been a leader of her own X-Men team multiple times. And with her power set, like, she can do such badass things. Why would you not want to use her? Poor Jubilee was just like the firecracker fireworks thing. They never do too much with it. And like, honestly, most of her storylines, like in this one, for instance, the tolerance for extinction, which is supposed to be off of the Operation Zero Tolerance storyline. In the original storyline, she gets captured and she doesn't really do much of anything. Everything, she's tortured through most of it, because they're trying to get the secrets out of her and figure out, Professor X's stuff. So it's like she's just a damsel most of the time. And that's not intriguing. It's not empowering. It's nothing great. Like, it's okay to happen once or twice. Like, every X-Men's gonna get captured once in a while. That's okay. But that's kind of all they really ever did with her. Even when they put her in their Generation X storyline, she didn't get to do much, honestly. Other characters in that group were way bigger and better than her. But in this, like, we finally get to see her shine a moment. Like, she's kind of like teaching Sunspot how to find his way and everything, while she's finding her own at the same time, and getting to see her like her almost a future self, even though it's an AI future version of her, of like what she could become, what she could do. I thought that was really awesome. And then later on, like, she has to stand toe to toe with a supervillain, like a super villain, which is Bastion. And she almost does some really hefty damage to him. Now, granted, he's a sentinel that can heal himself, so there's only so much she can truly do, because none of them are going to really defeat him. But the fact that she's able to stand toe to toe with someone like that, and she's holding her own with the rest of her fellow X-Men, that was great to see, because her power set can be really phenomenal with the right writer, of course, and the right artist, but you don't ever get to really see that. And I think this was like her moment. And this one episode, while is a standalone and doesn't really connect to anything else in a large scale situation, it helped develop her a bit more. And that was one of the great things about these filler episodes, is that you had character development, character growth. When you're just focusing on full-on storyline and a battle again and a battle, you don't get enough time to breathe and just reflect. And that's what this episode got to give her out of all the X-Men. I wish the other X-Men got to have that too. Storm kind of gets it as we hop into like her life death storyline, which was kind of funny. They only had 2 episodes kind of to go into that thing. It's 2 comic books that go into that whole storyline. But it's, again, one of those storylines where like they really rushed it. In the comic books, she loses her powers, and she don't get her powers back until like a couple years later. Like, it takes a long time before she actually gets to be Storm again. And with this, it was just like, it made it feel like it was 2 days, and 2 days she had no powers, and then it's back again. So it's like, what the struggle that she has to deal with isn't that big in reality compared to how it was in the books, where like it was a big deal. And honestly, this was one of those ones where like it was nice to see, but at the same time, I kind of feel like they dropped the ball a little bit. And certain things were a little weird. So like in the comic books, she has to really, like I said, she has to go years without her powers. And in turn, she's trying to like find her way. Like, where does she exist in the X-Men? You know, while you have Cyclops off trying to find himself and love again, she's off trying to find herself and where she is without her powers. Someone who is seen as a goddess. That's a big deal. Imagine being someone seen as a god and being brought down to a human level. It's like that's quite the flip. And in turn, like you get to have great storylines where like, she's still fighting the good fight with the X-Men, but as a human pretty much, as herself. And she's proving that she could still be worthwhile even without her powers. Because at the end of the day, she's a great leader. She's a great tactician just as much as Cyclops is. That's why, like in the comic books, those two usually led the gold team and the blue teams of the X-Men. And actually, it's in issue 201 where you get Baby Cable, Cyclops, and Storm kind of battle it out to see who will be the one to lead the X-Men. And at this time, like her powers aren't really fully back yet. So that's a big deal. Imagine someone without powers trying to fight Cyclops. Anyone, never mind just Storm. But she proves herself within that situation. And I feel like we could have had more moments like that to really showcase that she's so much more than her powers. And then eventually when she does get her powers back, something really weird happens. This made zero sense to me. Storm's powers are elemental control. Like, you know, she controls the elements and everything. And how they designed her in this was very 80s, where she has her mohawk and everything, and she even has like the cut up jacket and everything. It's like it's really cool seeing her in that look because it's a very popular look for her. When she gets her powers back, out of nowhere, her clothes just change into her first appearance costume from like giant size X-Men #1, and her long, luscious hair comes back. It's no longer a mohawk. So it's just like, wait, is her getting her powers back equate to having the ability to just grow hair out of nowhere and costume change? It was such an odd thing to happen. It made zero sense in the cartoon. And I just felt like, did no one catch this? Like, there's no one, like, did they think that as a viewer, we're not going to notice that the mohawk's gone and all of a sudden she just has hair everywhere? It was so weird. It to me was kind of off-putting. And there's little things like that that'll happen again and again as the show progresses, where it's just like, okay, this is where you're leaning on nostalgia and not in the best way. Like you're not fully fleshing it out and thinking about how we're gonna get to each of these steps. So like the logical thing would have been keep the mohawk, and if you want to give her that costume, okay, she gets her powers back and she goes back to the X Mansion. She goes back to the cabin with Forge, and there's her old costumes in a trunk, you know, and gets it back because she feels connected to her old self again. That would make more sense as opposed to it just appearing out of thin air. It was just so weird, so odd. Jumping from that, going into like episode 5, which was possibly the most emotional X-Men cartoon I've ever seen. Like this one episode, which I've watched probably 2 or 3 times now, like I actually had tears in my eyes by the end of this episode. And it's funny because like the first part of the episode, it's a lot of people was like, man, it's so slow, it's just dragging. Like I remember talking to friends online where it's like this episode is killing me. Is anything gonna happen? And to me, I thought it was the perfect setup. I thought it was great. It kind of reminded me of like watching The Walking Dead season 2, which everyone complains about, and it's just like it's the worst season. But to me, you needed that. You need that lull where it's just like everything feels like it's all good, nothing's gonna go wrong. So that way, when things do go wrong and it hits hard. And this episode did that. You know, I loved getting to see the Genosha where all the mutants are celebrating and being happy. They're uniting, and it's just this joyous moment. And you get to have little cameos too from like certain X-Men, like Exodus, and I think Dazzler is there at one point and everything. You know, Nightcrawler comes back, which is probably one of my fan favorites. And it was just this beautiful moment, just seeing mutants flourish. Now that was really sweet. You know, even Rogue getting to have a moment where she can touch someone, having that relationship with Magneto, which I know a lot of people were like, what the hell is that about? But it happens. Like there's been at least a couple, 2, 3 times in the comic books where her and Magneto do have a relationship. It's nothing too grand, but it does occur. Don't worry. She ends up with Gambit at the end of the day. So just calm down, guys. Calm down. All right. They get married, everything will be cool. But that whole emotional relationship between her and Magneto and her and Gambit and that whole back and forth. And Gambit, even like his growth, because there's a Gambit back in the day who just would have bounced. He would have fucking left. And granted, while he was hurt with everything, he stuck it through because he knew that he had a responsibility to her and the team and everything else. And then once it hits, once you get that giant Sentinel attack, which was very reminiscent of the storyline from E for Extinction, which was from Grant Morrison's run. So that's who I was referencing earlier. Like he has a whole run with the new X-Men with Cassandra Nova, who is kind of Professor X's like twin sister from like stuff. It's really convoluted. It's so weird. It's a great storyline. We'll get to see more of her in the Deadpool movie coming out later on. She won't be in this, but they definitely reference that moment where like, she sends a Sentinel like that, and it destroys all of Genosha. And so, like, seeing all of the mutants just being like annihilated, and it takes out thousands of mutants, which is a huge big deal. There's always this huge catastrophe in mutant history where like mutants are just taken out. You know, and for all the mutants that happened in the 80s, and the 90s, it happened again with Zero Tolerance. E for Extinction happens. Then you have obviously House of M with Scarlet Witch, where she takes out like mutants. Like it's kind of their destiny to always have a moment where like they're all just taken out and there's only a handful left. So this is like their moment in the cartoon. But that battle scene, it's so freaking badass. It's so intense. You know, Rogue is just freaking hitting things full force with holding back. You got Gambit just whipping out cards and blowing up stuff, and Magneto being a hero. You know, like he was showing that he could be a hero or in the earlier episodes where he's trying to prove himself to the X-Men as he's taking on that responsibility from the will that Professor X had left behind. But this is the true moment where like he's trying to protect the child Morlock Leech and the rest of them, which probably not the best idea to try to like use your powers with the character that nullifies powers. I thought that was an interesting thing to do there. Like I almost questioned like, did the writers know what they were doing when they put him in there? It was weird because in theory, Magneto should have been depowered from Leech because Leech is kind of like a rogue where like he doesn't have full control over his powers most of the time. And especially if he's being in such an exhilarating, life-threatening moment and he's holding on to Magneto, you'd assume he'd be draining him at that point in time. Which one could argue that maybe he did, and that's why Magneto couldn't, fight the good fight and stop everything like he probably could have. In any case, seeing him, have that moment with Leech and he's telling him, he's like, don't look, and it's like, don't be afraid and all this kind of stuff. It's like that was such a sweet, tender moment. And then we think he dies. Like for a whole week, all of us are like, oh snap, they killed Magneto. Because that blast just took him out. And the writers are no help. The writers are on social media like, yeah, he's not coming back. And I was like, oh snap, they killed him. But not just him. After he dies, Rogue goes on a freaking rampage and Gambit stops her because he knows that she'll get killed if she goes down that path. And then what does he do? He goes and tries to stop the Mega Sentinel, and then he just gets shanked right in the side. And when that happened, I was like, oh snap. Like it just hit. It was a gut punch. Because you never expect, the big dogs of the X-Men to be taken out. Especially not in the cartoons. In the original series, the only one who ever died was Morph, and he was created in the cartoon to be taken out. Like he was never meant to become anything more than a casualty, just a martyr for like someone like Wolverine to mourn and get revenge for. He was never meant to come back. But then fans, we loved him, and they ended up writing him back into the story. But otherwise, like they're never gonna take out an X-Men character. And so to see Gambit not just die, but like it's kind of a brutal death to just be stabbed right through the gut or through the side, and he's just hanging there. You just see him there. But he does the most badass thing ever, where his powers just start to consume the Sentinel. And I just love where he just ends it with,
the name's Gambit, mon ami. Remember it.
I was like, that's so freaking sweet. I love it so much. But then when Rogue is just holding him at the very end, and like the crack in her voice, like there's been talk online where like they feel like some of the voice actors haven't been able to hold up as they used to. This is the original voice actor of Rogue from back in the day. Like she's gotten older, obviously. It's been a couple decades since the original cartoon. So it's gonna be a little hard for her to try to capture that original youthful voice that she had. Personally, I think she's been doing an awesome job. I think she's crushing it. And especially in that moment. I felt the tenderness of like her emotion as she lost him and she's like,
I I can't feel you.
God, no. Like there was so much hurt, and I felt it. It's like, and then watching it two, three more times again, it's like I still felt it. Like I remember I was actually even going through my socials, and someone just popped that clip, and hearing the crack in her voice, I was like, no, I can't, not now, can't do that right now. So I think they that was one of the episodes where they nailed it. Like it was done so well, and I think it's because like they focused on that one thing. Like there wasn't two, three storylines pulling at it like some other episodes. I think that this one just got to be its own thing, and it hits so hard. Talking about thing like episodes that pull into like so many different story arcs. One thing that I thought was nice was the reveal of Bastion and that he was the major bad guy, and the fact that if you look like after finding out that he's the guy, if you look back into the past episodes and finding out that he's actually been in most of every episode in one way or another, like you'd either see the back of his head during a meeting with like the Senate or whatever as they're trying to figure things out, or he'd be a flash in someone's mind as a threat that's to come or whatever. Like he was in almost every portion of the series in the background pulling strings, and no one got to really notice it until now. And honestly, finding out that he was the bad guy for someone like me, I thought that was really cool and reminiscent for like my upbringing into the comic books of the X-Men. Because while I definitely was reading the Claremont series growing up, I didn't read it necessarily in the order that everyone else read it in. I was hardcore collecting comic books on the regular. Like I'd be hopping down my corner store or whatever store had books at the newsstand, and I'd be getting my X-Men. And this was that storyline that I was reading when I was hardcore into it, was the Zero Tolerance storyline. So it was a big deal for me when he's the guy, because like this was the year 1997. In 1997, I was a young kid reading X-Men comic books, and I was reading this story. So for X-Men 97 to be pulling from that story, that was really cool. And we had new mutants that were introduced that were going to become newer X-Men, like Maggot, Marrow, and Cecilia Reyes, who was kind of cool for me because like, well, I'm never that person who's like, yeah, I really want to have like representation, have like a Puerto Rican Captain America or something like that. I'm not that guy. I like original OG characters, but I love when a new character is introduced that can represent. And she was a Puerto Rican X-Man that was coming in, and in her day job, like she wasn't like some street thug or whatever. There wasn't some stupid backstory where she was a ghetto person. That's usually how it is. If we're gonna have a Hispanic black character, they're from the ghetto and they're no good or whatever. Think like a la Vibe from DC comic books. Vibe was a breakdancing drug dealer, street gang person, or whatever. Thankfully, the Flash TV show fixed that and turned him into a scientist and made him someone smart and brilliant. Her origin is not of the streets. She's a doctor. You know, she did something great with her life. She was already saving people before her powers were truly manifesting, and she was becoming an X-Man. So I thought that was really cool to have a character like that. Like I really liked reading about her in the books at that time. But yeah, this was a cool storyline. It was a big threat having like these the Prime Sentinels come out and find out that any human could be a Prime Sentinel, and the X-Men and all mutants in the world were no longer safe because they never knew when they'd be under a threat and be under attack. And the fact that Bastion himself was actually Nimrod, one of their old like, so it's weird. Like he's an old X-Men threat from the future, so he's old and new all at the same time. But like the fact that he was part Nimrod and then part Master Mold, and even for this part mutant. I think in the comic books he was necessarily part mutant. I think it was just a regular human that they put themselves inside of and amalgamated into this new thing. You know, it was just the whole premise really was just like the bad guys figured out that if you're gonna fight evolution, you had to evolve with it then. And that's what it all really came down to, was each side evolving to fight each other. But I always thought he was kind of a cool villain, a cool threat for them to have to face. Especially you think like how do you defeat this thing that adapts to your every move? Yeah, and then in these next three episodes, like from episode 8, 9, and 10, a lot happens. This is finally where it's all been coming down to. It all culminates to this part, which is the tolerances for his extinction, and it's nonstop in your face action. So much is happening. Like, sure, it has its small little lulls just so you can like catch your breath and everything, but this is what it's all been coming down to, was this part. And like, it's nice to finally have a thing where it's like, all right, 3 parts, you knew it, you're gonna have 1, 2, and 3, so something can finally breathe and develop in something great. And granted, the whole season's been developing into this moment, so it's not to say that they haven't been letting the whole like zero tolerance storyline breathe in general, because the whole season has been that. It's just all the little things, you know, like I said, like the glancing over the Inferno storyline. You know, there's even a moment in this, like, you know, we get to episode 9 and Magneto has had enough, and he just shuts the world down with like a giant EMP, brings back Asteroid M, and now the X-Men, you know, reunited with Professor X, have to try to stop him once again. As always, it's like you lose one threat just to get another with this thing. And arguably one could be like, oh my god, like Magneto, he's a bad guy again. Okay, as always. And it's like things can never be on the up and up with these guys. It's like they have a common threat, which is Bastion. Why can't they be on the same side, right? But at the same time, like, he is fighting Bastion. Like, stopping all the electronics stops the Sentinels. So there's only so much Bastion can do now. You know, he's a living organism, so it's not so you can turn him off. But at least he stopped the major threat, which was trying to kill all the mutants in the world. But at the same time, if the world has stopped, that affects everybody. Like, humans and mutants alike. How do you deal with the lesser of two evils, which is doesn't seem that much less anymore? If that makes any sense. But in any case, like, that brings upon a storyline where they go to Asteroid M and Wolverine almost kills Magneto. Like, this has happened in the comic books a few times where like Wolverine gets close enough to Magneto and he actually shanks him. You know, I think in the Ultimate comic books, Magneto had died at the hands of Wolverine, and it's happened in a couple other storylines as well. But this also triggered another thing from the Fatal Attraction storyline, which happened in the 90s, and Magneto rips the adamantium straight out of Wolverine's body. I kind of saw this coming when they brought Wolverine into this battle, because the X-Men had to split into 2 teams, and the fact that Wolverine was going with the team that was going to fight Magneto, and things have been pushing and escalating so much, where I was just like, this isn't going to end well for him. It's like, why are you going to bring the guy whose weakness is Magneto? Like they can't fight each other because he's never going to beat him. And lo and behold, it happens. Now, this is a big deal because in the comic books prior to that, Wolverine, there wasn't much known about him at that time. Like he was still like figuring things out. We were figuring things out as we were reading about him. And it was assumed that the scientist that had put the adamantium on his bones also gave him the claws. So no one really knew that he would have claws if those were gone. And then we discovered, lo and behold, yes, like he had bone claws the whole time. That's a part of his powers. Now, granted, for anyone who's watching this stuff today, if you're watching like the movies and stuff like that, then yeah, you know, all right, it's not that big of a deal. But for the comic book reader at that time, this was a big deal. This was like a revelation. It's like, oh snap, like they're always a part of him. Okay, that kind of changes some things then. It's like that's another part of his power. The other thing is, by not having adamantium inside of him, it brought out a feral Wolverine. So I kind of question now, it's like, will we get feral Wolverine? Will we get this more animalistic character who you couldn't really reason with a lot of times? Like, he's always been a killer type character where, like, you know, he's the one who needed to take out Magneto. He had no problem killing him. Every other X-Man would have struggled with that decision, not him. You know, and that has to do with his past of being a mercenary and everything, and whatever else he had done that he forgot about. But the thing is, the feral Wolverine storylines, while entertaining at times, yes, it was definitely a down time for Wolverine. Like, it's not the most celebrated of storylines for him within the X titles, because depending on the artist and depending who was writing him, sometimes he just felt like almost like an ape with claws. It was really weird. Like, he didn't feel like Wolverine anymore. The way they drew him, he looked more Beast than Beast did. You know, it was really odd. Like, they just misshaped his face a lot of times and everything. And I'm not a big fan of it. Granted, I get to kind of like the design where he was a bandana Wolverine, where pretty much like he just had a bandana that covered his full half of his face. And that was kind of a badass look at that time, I think. But besides that, I'd say please don't give us feral Wolverine. Just give us the Wolverine with bone claws, and that could be cool enough, and he can work around that. To step back a bit, can't believe I skipped over this, but going into these last 3 episodes, we get to see Rogue super unleashed. She is unhinged, and this was a big deal for like what happened after episode 5. Is who does Rogue become after she loses two loves of her life. Like she didn't just lose, Gambit. She also lost Magneto, who was the only man that she could touch in this story. So that's a big deal. It's like now she has no one. And granted, she has her X-Men family, but she's back to feeling alone again. And there's no one that she can turn to. And so she's just all out destroying stuff. Like she's just getting all the answers that she needs so she can find the person who's behind this, which for her, it's going to be Gyrick and Trask. Gyrick has been like almost the mastermind of sorts when it comes to trying to take out mutants. And then Trask, who created the whole Sentinel and Master Mold program. So like she's just trying to find out where these guys are, and she's just no one's gonna get in her way. All right. Which I thought was really nice also having like General Ross pop up and Captain America. Because in the comic books, the zero tolerance storyline did affect everybody. It affected humans as well because the Sentinels were attacking humans at certain points also. So it's like everyone was touched by this storyline in one way or another. I mean, even Spider-Man comes in at one point because J. Jonah Jameson sends him to like report on this. Like he wants him to get pictures and everything to find out what is the whole deal with this whole Bastion and thing and all these Prime Sentinels. Which I really like that you get to see glimpses of all these characters as these 3 episodes build up and things start to fall down. Getting to see Rogue start to make almost Wolverine-like decisions where like she takes Trask and she just drops him off of the roof. Like that was such a turning point for her because she's one of those characters that always believes in second chances. Like the fact that she even brings that up to Gambit and to them, everything it's always a thing that gets brought up over and over again because she had a second chance. Like she started off as a bad guy. She was originally a villain that worked with Mystique and everything. So to have her be the one that's just like, no, I'm done. No more chances for anybody, And now, granted, she doesn't kill him. Like he ends up becoming one of the Prime Sentinels and everything, but she still had to live with that. Like you see her live with that choice. Another thing I like that was is cool. So like one of those like callbacks. Like there's lots of callbacks within this series, and I like that they even reference some things from the movies. So like anyone who watched like the first X-Men film, there's this moment that Cyclops has with Wolverine, and they're getting their costumes and everything.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
And that's obviously making fun of like the OG costumes that they had from the 90s comic books. Well, in this, there's a moment that Cyclops gets to have with his son, Cable, and he throws him a costume, which is in this one, like everyone's wearing like their OG costumes from a different point or another. So Cable now gets to wear like his OG costume from the 90s. The original X-Men are wearing their costumes from like the mid 70s and everything. There's a lot of like second first appearance kind of costumes. Even Wolverine's in his infamous orange and brown, but Cable is looking at this as like,
Almost forgot.
Am I going to war or a circus?
What'd you expect? Black leather?
and it's like, oh, what a great like callback to that moment and everything. And it's great that it's Cyclops that gets to do it because like you don't get to have too many moments with Cyclops where you can just like show he has a sense of humor and stuff like that because he's always so serious. And it's like it's great that he has like these moments of levity, even like within his own son. Let's just get to this last episode. I've been chiming on for too long already about all this stuff. I gotta be honest. I got a lot of mixed feelings for this last episode. In one hand, I think it wraps things up in kind of a nice way. Like I said, the action has been amazing going through all this. Really cool fight scenes and everything. I love seeing my boy Nightcrawler just getting there and bamf over and over again and doing some cool stuff, which I think they utilized him really cool within the season. Like, I'm glad that they brought him into the fold because we only had like an episode or two in the original series. And you get to really be a part of the main roster of the X-Men. And I think he's like a really cool character. But like bringing him back from like episode 5, we see him. And then in episode 8 when like shit's really going down, like him and Wolverine, such a badass fight. It's so freaking cool. You guys want to talk shit about the animation? Watch that scene. All right, I'm sorry, you can't watch that scene. I think that's not some cool animation of him just teleporting everywhere and fighting all these Prime Sentinels as they're trying to protect Rogue. I thought that was super freaking cool. There's other parts in this where things kind of went awry, and I was like, all right, you guys are just using like scapegoats to try to get through some of this stuff. They leaned on certain things that kind of annoyed me. Major thing being pretty much the Phoenix. In the original series, the Phoenix isn't really used. Now, granted, Jean Grey within that time was always kind of the Phoenix. So it was always there a part of her in some sense. It never truly leaves her. But the way they brought it out of nowhere in this, it didn't make sense to me. I thought it was really stupid, honestly, as she has to fight off Cable, who's being manipulated by Sinister. I thought it was ridiculous. Now, granted, yes, the Phoenix power is strong and everything it did makes sense, but the fact that after the threat was done, quote unquote done, it just goes away, and then she's just regular Jean Grey fighting stuff with her regular powers. And now like the Bastion is still a super threat who's now evolving as they fight him, and he ends up becoming so powerful that he destroys half of he destroys Cable's arm and everything and absorbs it and becomes like this super sentinel. He already was, but I guess he's even more super having part of Cable on him. I don't know. And then he flies off to take out Asteroid M, and there's nothing she could do about it. I was like, okay, if you're gonna bring out the Phoenix, you can't bring it out and have it just randomly go away. It doesn't make sense. The Phoenix didn't work that way. The Phoenix wasn't this force that would just come and help you out because it's like, oh, your son's in danger. Okay, I'm gonna help you. Peace. That's so stupid. Like, the Phoenix would have stayed there, and she would have used it to just eliminate Bastion. Like, she used it to destroy Sinister on a molecular level. It's like, why couldn't she just do that to Bastion, who is the true threat? He is the true uber threat right now, not Sinister. It made zero sense to me. But it just goes away, and now they have to try to fight this thing on their own with their regular powers, which in turn it makes it seem like her regular powers aren't good enough. She's a top tier X-Men character, like just mutant in general. Like, she's up there within the alpha omega levels of what she can do, but since she has both the telepathy and telekinesis, I don't know why they downplayed her in such a way where like they had to give her the Phoenix and then steal it. At the same time, like the fact that characters like Storm were just taken out so easily, like Storm was shown as an OP character in the beginning of the series. Like, she was ridiculous the way she was just taking out Sentinels like it was nothing. And it should have been the same way in this episode. But like in episode 9, she gets blasted when she's at Forge, gets taken out in the Blackbird, and now she's just captured. But like, she's not captured. Like, there's not like a nullifying neck brace on all of them that would just take away their powers. Her powers can still control the elements, even if she's being held like this. That doesn't stop her powers. So I don't know why like she wasn't just using her powers in that moment. It doesn't make any sense there. And it's like also like I don't know why Jean Grey doesn't just like release them and then they could all help out and fight. There's so much to it that just didn't make any sense to me. So it's like if she was the Phoenix, like the Phoenix is so powerful, it can do so much all at once. But yeah, like that's just one of those parts where I guys feel like the writers, honestly, bringing in, I want to stop talking about the Phoenix, but like I felt like they brought it in because at this point they're on episode 10 and they were told they can't do any more episodes past this. So they're rushed, and it felt like they had nothing else left in the tank. And I was like, the Phoenix, that'll help us, right? But like, let's ignore all the other mutants that we have on hand on this chessboard that can help out, right? Let's just do that. Okay, they're so stupid. For that matter, I feel like they really downplay Cable. Like, Cable's such a powerhouse of a mutant. The big thing with him is like having that techno-organic virus. Now that kind of holds back some of his power because he uses a good chunk of his power to keep the virus from spreading and to keep it under control. But like, his mutant abilities are at a godlike level too. Like, if he didn't have that virus in him, he could move planets pretty much. That's how powerful his ability is. In which they kind of show it by the fact that when he's under control from Sinister, like he's able to fight back his mom, Jean Grey, who's also super powerful. Like he can probably almost obliterate her if he wanted to. Hence why they had to bring in the Phoenix Force. But yeah, I didn't like seeing how Bastion just destroyed him. Like, he never had a chance. Like, at least give Cable a fighting chance against him and then have Bastion heal himself and then come back from it. It would have been nice if we saw more from it. I felt like Cable just didn't really have much of a moment to shine after coming back from Sinister's possession of him. Another thing with this episode, while cool in one hand, the other hand, it's also just like, okay, I get it. The amount of cameos, like there was so many cameos within this, and in one hand, it's nice because it's like they should be showing other characters from the Marvel universe in this. I actually always liked it when there was like crossover spots with like Spider-Man and the X-Men or whoever, because they're all part of the same world. But at times it kind of just felt like they were just there to be there. Like, seeing Captain America and Iron Man in that like boardroom with the president and everyone else, they're just there. And even like when the Prime Sentinels come back and they're fighting, like they're not fighting them, they're just there. It's like, They should just be fighting. It didn't feel like they were doing anything. You see Daredevil, Black Panther, again with Silver Samurai. We even get to see Omega Red with a few of his cronies. It's like everyone's just popping up. You know, Spider-Man and Mary Jane were even seen on the street as they're watching the news, you know, which that didn't like, it was cool seeing Mary Jane and him together, but that didn't make any sense to me because there's a threat happening. He would have been Spider-Man. He wouldn't be on the street as Peter Parker with Mary Jane. Maybe he'd be Spider-Man with Mary Jane, but he wouldn't be Peter Parker in that moment. Like, he's going to be Spider-Man saving people. He's always going to be saving people first and foremost. So I felt that was used incorrectly in that moment, but all of them were just there. Like, none of them were like, the only person I felt that was kind of used to progress the story in some facet was Black Panther, because he was telling the president, it's like, hey, you might want to rethink this. All right, don't be sending missiles up there because you're going to regret it, you know. And then Captain America even giving his 2 cents of like, yo, I don't know about this. But otherwise, everyone was just there to be there, you know. It was just taking up space. And honestly, that's just time that could have been used better with the X-Men, in my opinion. That being said, if used properly, there could be some cool crossovers heading into the future, though. You know, this first season has been well received for the most part. I, along with many other people who love the X-Men, have been mostly happy with this. You know, there's small gripes here or there, as there's always going to be with most adaptations of anything. But overall, this is a success. And I think going forward, like, some things are laid out that can lead to really big, cool things. So, for instance, in this last episode, there's the whole mind battle between Professor X and Magneto, as he's trying to get Magneto back and help him through like the turmoils of like his past, and trying to get him to a place where he can be himself again, and also realize that, you know, the path you're on is not a good path. I think that there's a possibility that could be laying the groundwork for the Onslaught storyline. Honestly, a lot of the stuff that happened within this series felt like it could be leading to something like that. In the Onslaught storyline in the comic books, this is when Professor X's mind and almost like the body and will of Magneto joined into one entity, and it became Onslaught, which was this devastating force that was just taking out all the heroes. Like, it was being obviously most devastating to the X-Men, but it also affected the whole Marvel universe to a point where we had the Heroes Reborn storyline. And this is where like the whole Avengers and everyone got taken out. They were just brought like to a whole other world. But the Onslaught character himself was always super badass, super cool. And it was this dark side to mostly Professor X, because that was the major portion of it, was the Professor X side. Like, he was this psionic being that would just take out people mentally. And Professor X kind of references something to it in this moment, where like they're in Magneto's mind. He's talking about like the storm and the waters and everything, and what they represent, which is like the dark past and that Magneto has to deal with. And Professor X is like, I have this too, you know, but we get through this and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, so him referencing is like, I too have a dark side to me that I have to battle every day. I predict that their minds may have left an imprint on each other, and going forward, we could see that storyline develop, and maybe Onslaught could be a future threat after the next big threat, which is what they hinted towards. And I'm actually going to say hinted. The next big threat that's going to happen, which is Apocalypse. Apocalypse is always a big guy that's going to keep on coming back. This is going to be a cool storyline to see, because we see the X-Men are left in the past of like, what's it, 3000 BC, I think it said, and they're in the origin of Apocalypse. Like, they're seeing Apocalypse in his youth. And Apocalypse, for those who know, like, he's considered to be the first mutant. You know, he's the original mutant who kind of starts it all off. I think there could be something really interesting here, because in the origin of his story, like, he's the first mutant, and he deals with like slavery and all this kind of stuff within Egypt. He's discovering his powers and what they can be and what they can do. And obviously, with everything he faces, he doesn't go down a good path. With this introducing him, or that version of Apocalypse, to the X-Men, you know, mainly being Professor X and Magneto, along with, you know, with some stragglers here or there of the other X-Men, but those two specifically, it'd be interesting if they're the reason he becomes an evil mutant and is so hell-bent on creating a perfect society of mutants and having only the best of the best, you know, thrive and rise through all of this of humanity and Earth. Because I can see something like that happening, honestly, because of the bickering between Magneto and Professor X, or even just like him learning of what their future looks like him finding out in the future that the humans are trying to kill the mutants, and the mutants are the obvious evolution of everything, and they should be the ones on top. I could see him just like putting two and two together, like, oh well, that's how it is. I gotta fix that, and I'm gonna start doing that now. Which another thing I could see them also doing with this could be the Age of Apocalypse. I think that could be another huge event that like they've kind of slightly hinted towards in the past by just having like characters look like they were from the Age of Apocalypse storyline. So if you go to like the episodes One Man's Worth from the original series, there's a point where you get to see Wolverine and Storm in this alternate future where Professor X doesn't exist. And in that world, they don't show Apocalypse, but you can see the X-Men look like the Age of Apocalypse characters. Like Magneto is actually the leader of the X-Men. So I think it'd be really cool if they actually go within that realm, because it looks like they could be heading towards something like that. Also tapping into Apocalypse, everyone who thought Gambit was dead, which even I thought it for a bit, I think he is dead, but he's not gonna be dead. Apocalypse popping up at the end of the episode with Gambit's card tells me that we're going to see Gambit come back as the Horseman of Death, just like he was in the comic books. Now, granted, in the story they have here, he died and he's going to come back as Death. Well, in the comic books, he went on his own accord. Like, he ends up actually leaving the X-Men and going to Apocalypse because he feels like he's kind of being pushed out of the X-Men and everything because of Mystique's kind of bullshit and deceivery. And so Apocalypse turns him into the Horseman of Death. And there's a big storyline there between him and Rogue, and things go dark for a long time. But we could see our boy come back, and probably in a way more devastating way that we've ever seen him before. I think possibly one of the biggest things that happened at the end of this, which really hit me at a place that was very special and important, because one of my favorite X-Men books growing up was this 4-part miniseries called Cyclops and Phoenix. And in this series, while in the comic book, their minds are brought into the future in like this alternate future, and they're put into like these cloned bodies, and they're pretty much their job is to help out a young Nathan Dayspring, as he's called in that, but it's their son, it's Cable, it's Nathan Summers, and they're trying to protect him and kind of raise him and guide him through his teenage youth and help him with his powers and everything. Because in this world, Apocalypse is trying to like create a body to put himself, because Apocalypse, how he survives through all the years, which you've seen in the movies and even in the cartoons, he's always transferring his essence into a new body so that he can keep on living and going forward. Generally, he's putting himself into a strong mutant body. You know, like in the movies, he tried to do it with Professor X, and in the comic books, he tried to do it with Cable. Cable's one of the strongest mutants that existed during this time period, at least. But it's a really cool storyline. I love it so much, especially because like they never got to spend time with Cable. You know, he's gets sent to the future and then that's it. So this was like their moment to be the parents that they were meant to be to him. And with how this whole series has been, like Cyclops dealing with, you know, not wanting to be a neglected father, like how his father was to him and everything, having this moment, having it all culminate to this moment where it's like he can now get to be the dad. You know, granted, it's still at a point where like his son's already developed quite. He's probably like anywhere from like 11 to 13 years old, if not a little older. He's missed a lot, but at least he still gets to be there for a formative part of his life and help him become the man who we become Cable. You know, who is considered a savior. Like Cable within like his storyline, especially within the Phoenix and Cyclops thing, he's considered like as a chosen one, a messiah of sorts. He's very much a Jesus figure who's going to help out the mutants, and so they're there to help him become that man. You know, he's almost like a John Connor to some extent. And I think a good thing about having it done this way as opposed to the comic books, and the comic books, you know, as much as I love the comic books, there's a lot of convolutedness that happens down there too. You know, it doesn't just happen to these live action or animated adaptations. You know, the X-Men books have always been considered some of the hardest books to get into because there's so many layers of time travel and all this crap that really just fuddles things up. People are always like, I don't know X-Men book to hop into. And it's hard. It's really hard. And within this story with the Cyclops and Phoenix, you know, miniseries, because they're not in their real bodies, they don't have their powers at first, so they're kind of just human, and they actually have to like relearn how to use their powers before they can even help him out. And within a 4-issue miniseries, that takes away important storytelling that could be put forward towards their relationship with him in general. So it's gonna be kind of cool to see them as themselves with their son and is dealing with all that stuff. My hopes are that with all these storylines that they're building up towards, though, is that we don't have another 10 episode run, and that we're not stuck with one episodes that should be telling possibly an 8 episode story. You know, please give them like at least 15, 20 episodes. I say give them 20 episodes. 20 episodes would be great to have to tell a bunch of X-Men stories, honestly. Yeah, but as you can see, that's a lot that they laid out in that last episode. That last episode, they had to finally defeat Bastion, defeat and bring back Magneto. You know, plus they're defeating Sinister while we're at it, if we just want to throw him in there. But then they're also laying the groundwork for maybe a possible Onslaught storyline. I could be wrong about that one. I'm probably seeing into that one. But also a storyline of Wolverine as who is he going to become without his adamantium claws. The storyline of Apocalypse and his origin and what he's going to do while the main X-Men team aren't on present day Earth. You know, the storyline of a Cyclops and Phoenix with their child. You know, the storyline of Gambit as Death. Like there's a lot there. I'd even argue if they start bringing in other Marvel characters like the Avengers and stuff like that, does that become a thing? Does the Phoenix come back? Like there's just so many pieces that they're dropping into like this 30-minute episode, which like in one hand, really cool, really well done. But on the other hand, it's a lot to juggle and it's setting up a lot that could fall apart if they're not given the proper amount of episodes and time to tell everything correctly.
One more thing.
Okay, and I gotta take a moment to talk about Wolverine, Jean Grey, and Cyclops. This damn love triangle. Oh my lord. I felt like this was the moment. Like they missed an opportunity here, right? Because anyone who hates Cyclops, Jose, and who loves Wolverine, we all love Wolverine. This was that moment for me where it's just like Wolverine was the bitch, and Cyclops was actually the most reasonable, logical guy of this whole situation. You know, we find out that there's a clone of Jean Grey. We have Jean Grey, Madeline Pryor, right? And Wolverine's pining over fucking Jean through this whole situation. So many different layers here, levels of things where it's like, hey, how did Wolverine not tell that Madeline Pryor wasn't Jean Grey? Like I felt like he could have smelled her on a freaking blood molecular level and tells like, wait, something's a little off about you. You're not 100% her. His nose didn't pick that up. This dude's nose can freaking smell the atmosphere outside of your butthole, right? But he can't freaking tell that this isn't the real Jean Grey. But love blinds you, I guess. But there's this whole moment between like there's a confusion of like for poor Cyclops. Like he's just like, who have I been with this whole time? Who am I having a baby with? You know, is it Madeline? Is it Jean? Am I like Jean's the one I love, but I love Madeline because she is Jean. Like he's so torn, and if rightfully so. And Jean's out there like trying to like figure out who she is within all this. Like where was she during certain points within her lifetime, since she can feel memories from Madeline, but she feels her memories and she doesn't know what's real. And Wolverine's there trying to help her and console her and guide her through all this as someone who can relate to having bad memories, you know. And then they share this kiss. And when they share the kiss, and then he pulls away because he's like, you know, it's like, no, you're not my girl. Like, you belong to somebody else. I couldn't help but feel it's like, this is your moment. This is everyone's moment to have everything. Cyclops could have just stayed with Madeline Pryor and they could have had their life and had their baby and everything would be fine and dandy. And Jean Grey, who wanted Wolverine in this moment, can just be with Wolverine. Because there's always that small part of her that kind of wants to be with him because he's the bad boy, you know, and she probably thinks like, I can fix him. Quite literally, because of her powers, she probably feels like she can fix him. And it's like he should have been like, yo, this is it. Let's do this. It's like everyone wins. It's like the friends who end up with twins, you know. This was that time. And they just throw it away. Like, but like they were all so stupid. And like I never felt bad for Wolverine in this whole situation. Because like he's like crying about her through the whole thing. And on the sidelines, we got poor Morph. I felt bad for Morph, who clearly probably has some kind of deeper feelings besides friendship for Wolverine. Like I definitely felt like they hinted towards some stuff there that didn't bother me too, because his characters like Morph and Mystique, being the fact that they can change into anybody, they can morph into anyone, you know, I think them being like sexually fluid and all that kind of stuff makes total sense, you know. And honestly, with Wolverine's animalistic, you know, being and his pheromones, they probably got to morph or whatever. But like that's the only guy where I felt like, oh, this poor dude, like he'll never, you know, get the person he wants to be with, because that guy's too focused on this chick who's gonna be Madeline was married to Cyclops, so in theory Jean's kind of married to him too, you know. So it's like, why are you pining after someone who's taken? All right, move on, keep on trucking. They always annoy the crap out of me. It's like, you can have anyone you want. Like Wolverine's had so many loves in his lifetime. No, he's had quite a lifetime, and he'll continue to have more. Like he's had a relationship with Storm. It's like, go after Storm. Storm's available. Granted, not so much now that she's with Forge. But it's like, why are you wasting your time with this chick? But it's like, when there's two of them, well, now you don't have to waste your time anymore. Take Jean, you take Madeline, boom, we're done. Conversation over. This was the obvious solution for everybody. But no, we had to have a little crybaby on our hands. Ugh, so annoying.
One more thing.
There was a part of the first episode that didn't make any sense to me, though, over time. And that is the fact that everyone's talking about Professor X like he's dead. But this is supposed to be the continuation of the original X-Men series. And the original X-Men series, the X-Men and Magneto all know that Professor X isn't dead, that he's off with the Shi'ar Empire because they're the only ones who can cure him or fix his ailments from when Gyrick had attacked him. But they're talking about him as if Gyrick shot him, but when you know that he didn't shoot him, he didn't kill him. Now, if the world's supposed to think that, that's fine. And that's okay if the rest of the world's supposed to think that he's dead, just to carry on that narrative. But they know the truth. So since they know the truth, I don't know why there was this whole thing talking about like his will and testament and how Magneto was all of a sudden given the X-Men. It's like, I don't understand why that happened. It didn't make any sense. Like, why are you guys even following this will and testament? Because it doesn't mean anything. He's not really dead. Like, this is all stupid. It didn't make any sense to me, especially when later on he does come back and they're like, they knew that he was going to come back, or maybe they didn't know he was going to come back, but they knew he was out there. So it's just like, it didn't make any sense to me. It's probably this narrative that was pushed where like sometimes the writers just forgot certain things that happened and they're hoping that we forgot too. But it's like, no, it's easy to not forget. I just binge watched X-Men last week, man. But that being said, that's my recap of the X-Men 97 series. You know, hope you got some nice little tidbits of extra Easter eggs and everything. You know, hopefully my comic book librarian mind gave you some extra things that you probably weren't noticing or wouldn't have got otherwise. As always, like, subscribe, comment, let us know what were your thoughts. Are there anything that you noticed that maybe I didn't even pick up within this series? What was your high point of the series and low point? What are you looking forward to within the next season? You know, what storylines do you think they should be hitting upon? As always, you can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter. We are Not a Strong Starts. You can follow me at Nicolopolis, wherever Nicolopolis is sold. Until next time.